to be candid, they're not to terribly significant degrees. But I do think it's important to understand how these regional dynamics are playing out and can affect the cause for Palestine and the Palestinian struggle. The three things that I'm going to be discussing are the opportunities and challenges around the Iran deal, which was recently concluded, opportunities and challenges around the recent Russian intervention in the Syrian civil war and what it means for the region, and opportunities and challenges around the most recent increased uprising on the ground in Palestine today. So let me begin with the opportunities presented by the recent passage of the Iran deal. Obviously, the United States and Iran have been in an adversarial relationship for some time, and the prospects of an international agreement which brings to conclusion one of the longest-standing, outstanding issues of contention between Iran and the international community, which was the question of Iran's nuclear program, bodes very well for a change in that relationship between Iran and the United States. And obviously, a change in that relationship can have huge implications for the geostrategic relationships in the region, and I think we've already begun to see some of that take place. The opportunities around this are significant, not so much because of the U.S.-Iranian relationship and how it may change, but the way in which Israel has used the Iranian question to dominate the direction of the international agenda as it comes to what takes place in the region. One only has to look to the history of the discussions between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Obama in the Oval Office around many of the meetings that they've had, where President Obama talked about the challenges that settlements present, the importance of restarting a peace process, as meaningless as that peace process may have been, and Netanyahu responded with Iran, 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 Iran. If Iran is indeed off of the top of the international agenda, where it has sucked up a great deal of energy and bandwidth from the major players in the international community, the Iranian boogeyman disappears from the Israeli Prime Minister's arsenal. This is a good thing, and it is an opportunity insofar as international attention that has been dominated by the Iranian issue shifts to other issues in the region, including Palestine. I think there are possibilities for that to take place. It, of course, depends on a number of things, including how the implementation of that deal works out. There will be no shortage of very willing saboteurs to that deal. If it continues to prove to be an agreement that is lasting over time, I think it can have significant implications for the U.S.-Iranian relationship and pave the way for big changes in regional strategy of both players. That said, there are also challenges for the question of Palestine that are presented by the passage of the Iran deal. And here, what I'd like to do is offer something of a reality check on the conventional narrative that has prevailed after the passage of the Iran deal. After the passage of the Iran deal in, I think it was September 10th in the New York Times, the headline that ran in the New York Times was something to the effect of pro-Israel lobby suffers stinging defeat, or influential pro-Israel lobby suffers stinging defeat. I really don't think that's the case, and I don't think that's the case for a variety of different reasons, but I think it's important to focus on a couple of them. First, obviously, the Iranian issue has been at the top of the Israeli agenda and at the top of pro-Israel interest groups' agenda here at the United States for a very long time. But there came a point over the past several years when it became clear to both the Israelis and pro-Israel interest groups here in the United States that this administration was going to get a deal done, that it was committed to getting a deal done. That had serious implications for the Israelis and these pro-Israel interest groups as well, because it meant that there was a possibility that the U.S.-Iran relationship could be changing. And this was dangerous for various reasons, including the fact that it takes Iran off of the top of the international agenda. So what begun to happen over time is that the narrative from the Israelis, which was very much encapsulated at one point by the cartoon bomb that Prime Minister Netanyahu brought to the United Nations, where he drew a bright red line and said, this is the line of enrichment, and everything was about enrichment, the number of centrifuges, the number of facilities, how those facilities are being used, and so forth. And it changed after that. It changed, and it was no longer about nuclear benchmarks and where the program is and how it could be rolled back. But we began to hear about Iranian behavior in the region, financing that would come to Iran as a result of the sanctions relief that come in, and what that meant for the support for Iranian proxies. And we even heard claims about the need for Iran to recognize Israel as a Jewish state to really be accepted in the international community. This was really a shifting of the goalposts, a significant shifting of the goalposts by the Israelis that set a framework for a fight between the Israel lobby and the White House that we just saw come to a conclusion. The question is, why would the Israel lobby engage in a fight that it was most certainly going to lose? And when you're up against a dedicated president who has his signature foreign policy initiative on the line and is willing to support it, you're probably going to lose. The reason is there was a lot to be gained from this fight, even though there was something to lose. And the reality is that in bilateral relationships, there are various issues that are on the table. And in the U.S.-Israel relationship, it's not only about the Iranian issue, but also about other things, including, most importantly, the military aid relationship between the United States and Israel. And I think what we saw over the past couple of years, since it became clear to the Israelis and pro-Israel interest groups that the United States was going to go for a deal, was that these interest groups used to the greatest extent the leverage that they could create to pressure the administration to produce what has been called the consolation prize for the Iran deal. This consolation prize is reportedly in the number of $4.5 billion per year in new military aid for Israel, a record number which would come in a 10-year memorandum of understanding between Israel and the United States, about $15 billion more over 10 years than the previous memorandum of understanding. So the Israel lobby over the course of the fight over the Iran deal significantly shifted U.S. public opinion against the Iran deal, was able to create the leverage necessary within military aid negotiations to get a favorable outcome that would be unprecedented in terms of the amount of military aid. They were able to get a very, very good deal that limited the ability of their regional adversary to develop nuclear weapons in what is essentially an unprecedented set of regimes around inspections. And they were able to convince the rest of the world, including the New York Times, that they came out of all of this with the short end of the stick. So when we talk about the Israel lobby having suffered a loss on this, I offer that reality check to say that I don't think that is the case. So the challenge really from the passage of the Iran deal, although it does offer some opportunities in terms of a regional realignment over the longer term, in the short term it means that President Obama has expended a great deal of political capital on issues where he would challenge the Israel lobby, meaning it is very unlikely that he re-engages the Palestine issue, in case any of you had great hopes for that. But it also means that the U.S.-Israel relationship in terms of military aid is not weakened but significantly strengthened because of this deal. And this is something that all of us who are concerned about the use of those weapons against Palestinian bodies in the occupied territories should be very much concerned about. The second issue that I want to discuss that has implications for the Palestine issue is the Syrian civil war and Russian intervention in that war. Obviously, the Syrian civil war has had the most significant and costly and really devastating implications for Syrians themselves, most particularly Syrian civilians and their infrastructure. But it has also had dangerous implications for Palestinians, including Palestinian refugees living in Syria, and also for the regional dynamics that touch on the question of Palestine as well. The interests and the focus of regional players that had previously been focused on the question of Palestine are now very much significantly focused on the question in Syria, and to a great extent, rightly so, considering the extent of devastation that is taking place on the ground. I think that Russian intervention changes the dynamics here and possibly presents some opportunities and also some challenges. On the opportunities front, I think it's important to think about what are Russian interests in Syria. I disagree with the assessments that many make, including some pro-Putin types and some right-wingers here in the United States who make very interesting bedfellows, that Russian intervention in Syria is a show of strength. I think it's actually a show of weakness. We have to keep in mind that Syria has, for a very long time, since the early days of the height of the Cold War in the Middle East, been a Russian client state. And the fact that the Russians have resorted to military force to change outcomes and create influence on the ground in Syria is an unprecedented setback for the Russians there. It is not a show of strength. But the Russians see in Syria various strategic interests for them. I do not believe they care very much about Syrian civilians at all, but they do care about a number of strategic assets they have, including one of their very few year-round warm water ports that is on the coast in Syria, a variety of economic ties that they have, an economic interest in Syria, as well as potential economic interests that have been secured through agreements around the exploration of natural resources off the coast. And they also have a concern about setting an example for other client states and being able to demonstrate their willingness to support client regimes that exist around the globe for the Russians. And last on that list, I do believe the Russians have an interest in combating ISIS, but I don't think it is anywhere near the top of the reasons why they are intervening in Syria. That being said, I think Russian objectives in Syria are short range. I think the longer that their intervention goes on in Syria, the more complicated and risky it becomes for the Russians, especially if they begin to take on casualties and people in Russia begin to question why they're involved in propping up a regime which is very likely to fall. And so in the short term, they seek to maximize their political leverage to secure their interest in what they hope to be a bargain that is going to take place over the next several months. How that plays out really depends on what the actions of all the other players involved in the Syrian civil war and proxy war are. But I think what's important to keep in mind is that most of the players that have been involved in this war over time have known that Russian intervention was a card that the Russians could play. It's important now that everyone realizes that that final card that the Russians have had has been dealt. So the question is, can this be used as an opportunity to spur political conversation towards an outcome in Syria that brings an end to the civil war? It's going to be difficult to convince other parties to do that, including the United States and GCC states. But I think there is an opportunity to engage in a dialogue with GCC states about Russian intervention and frame it in a way that says, look, the reality is Syria has been a Russian client for a very long time. Russia has interests there, and I think it's far more palatable to GCC states to accept that Russia be the arbiter of outcomes or have significant say in outcomes in Syria than Iran. And that, I think, is the main prism through which these states look at the situation. So the extent to which this intervention can bring a political solution to the fore, I think it's an opportunity. The challenge, of course, is if the war drags on. I want to say a final word about the current uprising in Palestine, or the escalated uprising in Palestine, and the opportunities and challenges it presents. I think it presents an important opportunity to the extent that it signals to the Israelis that occupation is not cost-free, and that maintenance of the occupation is not a strategy that is sustainable over time. I'm not sure that it's going to have that kind of effect. as much as we would hope that it does. Opinion polling that I've seen over recent days has shown that in fact some 88% of Israelis believe that they do not want to see Benjamin Netanyahu in charge of security, which you might think is promising until you see who they would rather see in charge of security. The spectrum runs the gamut of right-wing candidates that includes Avigdor Lieberman, Naftali Bennett, and others. So the radicalization and rightward drift in the Israeli polity continues, and I think where the challenge is here is whether or not the current uprising sets back what I think have been very significant advances in global public opinion around this issue, which has viewed Palestinians increasingly as the victims of Israeli occupation, and has viewed the Israelis overwhelmingly as the reason why progress on the peace front does not continue. So I think for Palestinians, it's important to keep in mind that to the greatest extent that this uprising against occupation can be coordinated and can keep in mind the sensitivities of international public opinion, which are central to the solidarity necessary for the support for their cause. To the extent that that can be kept in mind in this uprising, if the energy behind this uprising can be channeled toward the kind of efforts that I believe have driven success for that change in public opinion, namely the effort for boycott, divestments, and sanctions, the more likely that this recent uprising can lead to positive things for Palestinians. If it continues like this, there are many challenges that one can see, and unfortunately, because of the brutality of the Israeli occupation, it is Palestinians that continue to pay the highest price for this. So, thank you.